The massive space station hung in the darkness between stars like a giant crystal flower. Nexus Prime was the most important place in the galaxy. It was where the Galactic Council met to decide the fate of entire worlds. Ships from dozens of different alien races came and went from its many docking bays. Each ship looked strange and wonderful, built by minds that thought very differently from humans. Ambassador Kang Day stood at the window of his small quarters, watching the alien ships move through space. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes. For 3 months he had been waiting for this day. Today the Council would decide if humans could join their group. Today Earth would learn if it had a place among the stars. Behind him, Dr. Park Nari was checking her data tablets one more time. She was young for such an important job, but she knew more about alien life than anyone else on Earth. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were neat and professional. She wanted to make a good impression. "The numbers are all correct," she said softly. "Our population, our technology level, our space travel capabilities, everything the Council asked for." Captain Lee Wan sat in the corner, cleaning his dress uniform for the 10th time that morning. He was a soldier through and through with scars on his hands from old battles and a straight back that never bent. He did not like this waiting. He did not like depending on words instead of actions. "They will judge us fairly," Kang Day said, though he did not sound completely sure. "We have shown them what humans can do. We have traveled to other star systems. We have built colonies. We have technology that works." The communication device on the wall made a soft sound. A voice spoke in the common galactic language, which all 3 humans had learned during their long journey to Nexus Prime. The human delegation will now present their case to the Galactic Council. Please proceed to Council Chamber 1. Kang Day straightened his formal robes. Park Nari gathered her data tablets. Lee Wan checked his ceremonial sword one last time. They had practiced this moment many times, but now that it was real, they all felt nervous. The walk to the council chamber took them through the main section of Nexus Prime. The corridors were huge, built to hold beings much larger than humans. Strange lights floated in the air, providing gentle illumination. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft colors. Other aliens walked past them in the corridors. Some looked like giant insects with too many arms and eyes that glowed. Others were made of pure energy, floating along without touching the ground. A few looked almost like humans, but with skin that changed colors or extra limbs. None of them paid much attention to the human delegation. To them, humans were just another primitive species asking for permission to join the galactic community. It happened often, and most requests were denied. The council chamber was enormous. The ceiling stretched so high that it disappeared into darkness. Hundreds of seats were arranged in circles, each one designed for a different type of alien body. At the center was a raised platform where the humans would make their presentation. As they walked to the platform, Kang Day looked around at the council members. He had studied pictures of the different alien races, but seeing them in person was still shocking. The Vorthak looked like living crystals that had grown into the shape of tall, thin people. Their leader, High Counselor Vexathara, sat on a throne made of the same crystal material. Light moved through his body in complex patterns that humans could not read. The Zephyrians filled an entire section of the chamber. They looked like giant, praying mantises but with 6 arms instead of 2. Their compound eyes reflected light in rainbow patterns. Queen Mind Kesara was the largest of them, speaking for the whole group through a shared mind connection. The Luminos had no solid bodies at all. They were beings of pure energy, floating in specially designed containers that helped them interact with solid matter, Luminos Prime. Zaltaron was a bright ball of shifting light that hurt to look at directly. There were dozens of other races present, each stranger than the last. Some breathed different gases and sat in special environmental suits. Others were so alien that humans could barely understand what they were looking at. Kang Day stepped up to the speaking podium at the center of the platform. His voice was clear and strong as he began the presentation that would decide Earth's future. Honored council members, I am Ambassador Kang Day, speaking for the human race and the planet Earth. We come before you today to request membership in the Galactic Council. He activated a holographic display that showed Earth from space. The blue and green planet rotated slowly, showing the continents and oceans that humans called home. Humans have achieved space travel, Kang Day continued. We have established colonies on 3 other worlds in our star system. We have developed clean energy sources and have begun to heal the damage done to our home planet during our industrial period. Dr. Park Nari stepped forward to present the scientific data. She showed the council information about human biology, technology, and culture. She explained how humans had learned to work together despite their differences. We have ended the major wars that once divided our species, she said. We have established a world government that represents all human nations. We have created art, literature, and music that we believe would enrich the galactic community. Captain Lee Wan presented information about Earth's defenses and military capabilities. He was honest about human limitations, but also showed that humans could defend themselves and their allies if needed. The presentation lasted for 2 hours. When it was finished, the council members began to discuss what they had heard. The humans could only stand and wait while alien voices filled the chamber. High Counselor Vexithara was the first to speak directly to the humans. His crystal body flashed with patterns of light that somehow conveyed amusement and contempt. Humans, he said, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. You call yourselves civilized, but you still wage wars among your own kind. You have polluted your birth world with primitive industrial processes. You have barely left your own star system. Queen Mind Kesara's voice buzzed with the sound of 1,000 insects talking at once. Our analysis shows that humans are aggressive and territorial. You fight over resources instead of sharing them efficiently. Your technology is crude compared to true galactic standards. Luminos Prime. Zaltharan's light pulsed in patterns that translated as words. You speak of ending wars, but you still maintain military forces. You speak of healing your planet, but the damage took centuries to create. This suggests poor long-term planning and impulse control. Other council members added their own criticisms. They pointed out that humans had nuclear weapons, that human governments were unstable, that human culture was too diverse to be truly unified. Kangde felt his anger rising, but he kept his expression calm. Park Nari's hands were shaking slightly as she listened to the aliens dismiss everything humans had accomplished. Li Wan's jaw was tight, and his hand moved unconsciously toward where his sword would be in a real battle situation. The final vote was not even close. Of the 47 council races present, only 3 voted to accept humanity's application. The rest voted to reject it completely. High Counselor Vexithara delivered the final judgment. The Galactic Council finds that humanity is not ready for membership in our organization. You are a young species with primitive technology and violent tendencies. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, you will have evolved beyond your current limitations. He paused, and his crystal body flashed with what might have been pity. Return to your small planet and continue your development. If your species survives its own barbaric nature, you may apply again in the future. Until then, Earth will remain under observation, but outside the galactic community. The chamber fell silent. Kang Dai stood at the podium for a long moment, feeling the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. He had failed his entire species. Earth would remain alone among the stars. Thank you for your consideration, he said finally, his voice steady despite his disappointment. We will remember this day. As the 3 humans left the council chamber, they could hear alien voices behind them discussing other business. To the council, humanity was already forgotten, just another primitive species that had reached too high too soon. But as they walked through the crystal corridors of Nexus Prime, none of them could have imagined that within 3 months, these same alien races would be begging for human help. None of them could have predicted that Earth's primitive nature would soon be the galaxy's only hope for survival. 3 months had passed since the humans left Nexus Prime in shame. The Galactic Council had returned to its normal business of managing trade routes, settling disputes between member races, and exploring new regions of space. The rejection of Earth's membership application was quickly forgotten by most council members. Captain Yoon Jin had stayed behind on Nexus Prime as Earth's military observer. It was a minor position that gave him access to basic council communications but no real authority. Most aliens ignored him completely, treating him like a piece of furniture that happened to walk around and wear a uniform. He spent his days in the observation deck, watching ships come and go from the massive station. Sometimes he filed reports, back to Earth, but there was usually nothing important to report. The council's daily business was routine and boring. That changed on a cold Tuesday morning when the long-range sensors began screaming warnings throughout the station. Yoon Jin was drinking coffee and reading a technical manual when the alarm started. Red lights flashed in the corridors and automated voices began speaking in dozens of different languages. Emergency protocols activated throughout Nexus Prime as Council security forces scrambled to their positions. Through the large windows of the observation deck, Yoon Jin could see ships moving in the distance. But these were not the usual Council vessels with their clean lines and bright colors. These ships looked different. They looked wrong. The new ships were dark and organic-looking, as if they had been grown instead of built. Their hulls seemed to pulse and move like living skin. Strange appendages stuck out from their sides, twitching and reaching like tentacles. Instead of clean energy signatures, they gave off readings that made the station's sensors scream in confusion. An emergency council session was called within the hour. Yoon Jin made his way to the council chamber, where he was allowed to observe from a small balcony reserved for non-member representatives. Below him, the alien council members were clearly frightened. High Councilor Vexthara's crystal body flickered, with rapid patterns of light that indicated extreme stress. His voice echoed through the chamber as he addressed the emergency session. "We have detected a massive fleet approaching our space," he announced. "Long-range scouts have identified them as devourers." A wave of fear swept through the chamber. Many council members had heard stories about the devourers, but no one alive had actually seen them. They were a legend, a nightmare tale used to frighten young aliens. Queen Mind Kesara's voice buzzed with panic frequencies that made other council members cover their hearing organs. The devourers consume everything in their path. They have not been seen in this galaxy for over 10,000 years. Luminos Prime Zaltharon dimmed significantly as he spoke. Our historical records show that they destroyed the ancient Krex Empire. 17 billion lives were consumed in less than a standard year. A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing the approaching fleet. Yoon Jin leaned forward to get a better look. The ships were enormous, some of them larger than entire cities. They moved through space in formations that seemed to shift and change like a living organism. The display zoomed in on one of the larger ships. Its hull was covered in what looked like scales or armor plates, but they moved and shifted constantly. Weapon ports opened and closed like mouths breathing. Energy readings showed that the entire ship was alive in some impossible way. "War Prime. Thegnos leads them," reported a Vorthak intelligence officer. "He is the same Devourer commander who destroyed the Ethan cluster 6 months ago." The display switched to show surveillance footage from the Ethan cluster attack. Yoon Jin watched in horror as Devourer ships swarmed over peaceful worlds. Instead of using normal weapons, they seemed to absorb entire cities into their hulls. Billions of aliens simply disappeared, consumed by the living ships. "They adapt to any weapon used against them," the intelligence officer continued. "Our energy weapons are absorbed and converted into fuel for their advance. Our defensive shields are studied and then penetrated. Every attack only makes them stronger." High Councilor Vexithara tried to project calm, but his crystal body continued to flicker with stress patterns. "We must organize our defenses. All Council fleets will converge on the Helios system to make our stand." Over the next several days, Yoon Jin watched as the greatest military force in galactic history assembled at Helios. Ships from every Council race gathered in a massive fleet that stretched across the entire star system. Vorthak crystal dreadnoughts hung in space like floating cities. Zephyrian swarm ships moved in perfectly coordinated clouds of thousands of vessels. Luminous energy beings powered weapons platforms that could destroy entire moons. The human captain sent regular reports back to Earth, describing the incredible alien technology he was witnessing. Weapons that could fold space and time, shields that existed in multiple dimensions, computers that could predict enemy movements before they were even planned. When the Devourers arrived at Helios, they came out of dark space like a plague of locusts. Their bioships moved in formations that defied understanding, flowing through space like water while maintaining perfect coordination. The first battle lasted 3 days. Yunjin watched from a command ship at the rear of the Council fleet as the two forces clashed. The alien weapons were spectacular, filling space with lights and energies that his human eyes could barely process. But nothing worked against the Devourers. Every time the Council forces fired their crystal cannons, the Devourer ships absorbed the energy and used it to repair themselves. When the Zephyrians tried their swarm tactics, the bioships learned their patterns and began moving to counter them before the attacks even began. The luminous energy beings tried to overload the Devourer ships with pure power, but the living hulls simply expanded to contain more energy. The bioships grew larger and stronger with each attack. War Prime Theknos commanded the Devourer fleet from a massive ship that looked like a cross between a whale and a spider. His communications were broadcast to the Council fleet in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "Your technology feeds us," he announced. "Your energy weapons make us stronger. Your sophisticated defenses teach us new ways to kill. You cannot win because victory itself makes us more powerful." On the second day of battle, the Council lost a quarter of their fleet. On the third day, they lost half of what remained. The Devourers had not lost a single ship. High Counselor Vexithara finally gave the order to retreat. The remaining Council forces scattered in all directions, abandoning the Helios system to the enemy. Yoon Jin's command ship fled with the rest, jumping through hyperspace toward the core worlds. But the Devourers followed. Their bioships could track hyperspace signatures and predict where the fleeing vessels would emerge. Council ships that had escaped the main battle were hunted down one by one across multiple star systems. The Vorthak homeworld fell within a week. Its crystal cities were consumed by Devourer bioships that landed on the surface like massive parasites. Billions of Vorthak were absorbed into the living hulls. Their consciousness added to the collective intelligence of the fleet. 3 Zephyrian hive worlds were consumed next. The insectoid aliens tried to use their perfect coordination and hive mind to organize resistance, but the Devourers simply absorbed entire hive complexes and turned their coordination against them. The Luminos suffered worst of all. As energy beings, they were pure food for the bioships. Entire luminous collectives that had existed for thousands of years were consumed in minutes. Their knowledge and experience added to the growing intelligence of the Devourer fleet. Within 2 weeks, the greatest civilization in galactic history was on the edge of complete extinction. Refugees fled toward the galactic rim, carrying stories of horror and defeat. The bioships followed, growing larger and more intelligent with each world they consumed. Yoon Jin found himself on Nexus Prime again, as the Council held what might be their final emergency session. Only a few dozen representatives remained alive. The great chamber that had once held hundreds of proud alien races now echoed with the voices of a broken remnant. "We need new ideas," High Counselor Vexithara said, his crystal form barely glowing with remaining energy. "Our most advanced weapons are useless. Our greatest military minds have been consumed. We need something the Devourers have never seen before." Queen Mind Kesara's buzz had become a weak whisper. "They adapt to all sophisticated technology. They learn from all advanced tactics. How do we fight an enemy that becomes stronger from our attacks?" Luminos Prime Zaltheron flickered weakly in his containment unit. "Perhaps we need less sophistication. Perhaps we need simpler methods." That was when all eyes in the chamber turned to Captain Yoon Jin. He was sitting in his observer balcony, taking notes as usual. But now, for the first time since he had arrived at Nexus Prime, the alien council members were looking at him with something other than contempt. They were looking at him with hope. Yoon Jin felt his communication device buzz with an incoming message from Earth. He glanced down at the screen and saw a simple question. "Orders, sir?" He looked up at the desperate alien faces staring at him from across the chamber. These were the same beings who had called humans primitive barbarians. Just 3 months ago, the emergency council meeting had been going on for 6 hours. Outside Nexus Prime, the last few council ships limped back from failed battles against the Devourers. Inside the Great Chamber, alien leaders who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years tried to figure out how to avoid extinction. Captain Yoon Jin watched from his balcony as the most powerful beings in the galaxy argued like frightened children. Their great technology had failed them. Their advanced weapons had only made the enemy stronger. Their sophisticated tactics had been learned and turned against them. High Counselor Vexthera's crystal body was dim and cracked from stress. He had lost his homeworld and most of his people in the past 2 weeks. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of defeat. "We have tried everything," he said to the small group of survivors. "Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, quantum torpedoes, dimensional rifts. Nothing works. The Devourers adapt to every attack and become stronger." Queen Mind Kasara had lost 2/3 of her hive minds. Her buzzing voice was weak and broken. "They consume our technology and turn it against us. They absorb our strategies and use them to predict our next moves. We are fighting an enemy that learns faster than we can adapt." Luminous Prime Zaltheron flickered weakly in his containment unit. Half of his energy being had been drained in the last battle. "Perhaps our sophistication is our weakness. We think in complex patterns that the Devourers can read and counter. We need simpler methods." That was when High Counselor Vexthera did something that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. He turned to look directly at Captain Yoon Jin. "Human," he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Your species wages war differently than civilized races. Perhaps there is wisdom in barbarism." The chamber fell silent. Every alien eye turned toward the human captain sitting alone in his observer balcony. Yoon Jin stood up slowly, feeling the weight of their desperate hope. "You want our help?" he asked, his voice clear in the silence. "The same species you called barely evolved primates?" Vexthera's crystal form flickered with what might have been shame. "We were wrong. Your primitive methods might be exactly what we need." Ambassador Kang Dae had returned to Nexus Prime that morning with a small diplomatic team. He stood up beside Yoon Jin, his face showing no emotion as he looked down at the alien leaders who had humiliated him months earlier. "You dismissed us," Kang Dae said calmly. "You said we were too violent, too primitive, too barbaric for your civilized society. Now you want us to save that society?" Dr. Kim Soo, who had replaced Dr. Park Nari as the mission's science officer, stepped forward with her data tablet. She was younger than Park Nari, but had the same sharp intelligence and professional manner. "I have been studying the Devourer attacks," she announced. "Their biotechnology is designed to counter advanced weapons and sophisticated tactics, but it expects logical, predictable responses." She activated a holographic display that showed the structure of a Devourer bioship. The living vessel pulsed with organic rhythms, its hull shifting and adapting to different threats. "The adaptation process requires the bioship to understand what it is facing," Kim Soo explained. "It studies energy patterns, analyzes weapon signatures, and learns tactical patterns. But what happens when it faces something completely illogical?" Captain Yoon Jin smiled, and several council members recoiled from the expression. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "They have never faced human warfare," he said. "Real human warfare. The kind of fighting that civilized species find too brutal to contemplate." Queen Mind Kesara's compound eyes focused on the human captain. "What do you mean by real human warfare?" "Suicide attacks," Yoon Jin said simply. "Nuclear weapons used as mines, chemical weapons, biological warfare, ramming ships loaded with explosives directly into enemy hulls, fighting with knives when the guns run out." The alien leaders looked horrified. This was exactly the kind of barbaric behavior that had led them to reject humanity's council application. "Those methods are primitive," Luminous Prime Zaltheron protested weakly. "They show no sophistication, no elegance, no honor. Exactly, Ambassador Kangde said. The Devourers expect sophisticated attacks that they can analyze and counter. They do not expect a human pilot to ram an explosive-filled ship directly into their hull just to kill a few enemies. Dr. Kim Soo pulled up combat footage from human military exercises. The alien council members watched in growing alarm as human soldiers practiced tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human military doctrine is based on winning at any cost, she explained. We use whatever works regardless of how primitive or brutal it might seem. We have studied war for our entire history. High Counselor Vexithara studied the combat footage with his crystalline sensors. These tactics, they make no logical sense. Why would soldiers sacrifice themselves for minimal tactical gain? Because sometimes minimal tactical gain is all you need, Captain Yoon-jin replied. Because sometimes the psychological impact is more important than the physical damage. Because sometimes you need to prove that you are willing to die before the enemy is willing to kill you. The council members exchanged uncertain communications in their various languages. They were being asked to trust their civilization's survival to beings they considered barely above animals. Ambassador Kang Dae let them think for a few minutes before stating his terms. If you want our help, you give us full tactical command of all remaining council forces, he said. Complete authority over fleet operations. No interference from council commanders who think they know better. Vex Thara's crystal body flickered with alarm. You ask us to place our most advanced ships under primitive command? We ask you to place your remaining ships under effective command, Kang Dae corrected. Your advanced commanders have failed. Your sophisticated strategies have been turned against you. Your elegant tactics have fed the enemy. Queen Mind Kesara buzzed with frustration. How do we know your primitive methods will work? You do not know, Yoon-jin said bluntly. But you know that everything else has failed. You can trust us and possibly win, or you can keep doing what you have been doing and definitely lose. Dr. Kim Soo stepped forward again. We also want full council membership for humanity when this is over. No probation period, no conditions, no second-class status. And if you fail? Luminos Prime Zaltharon asked. Then we all die together, Ambassador Kang Dae replied. But at least we die fighting instead of running. The council members talked among themselves for another hour. The humans waited patiently, knowing that desperate people would eventually make desperate choices. Finally, High Counselor Vexithara spoke for the group. We accept your terms, he said, his voice heavy with defeat and hope in equal measure. You will have tactical command of our remaining forces. When this is over, if we survive, humanity will be granted full council membership. Captain Yoon. Jin activated his communication device and spoke to Earth. Admiral Song Hai, this is Captain Yoon-jin. You are authorized to bring the fleet to Nexus Prime. We have a war to fight. Within hours, hyperspace signatures began appearing throughout the Nexus Prime system. Human ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in formations that made the alien observers nervous. These were not the elegant vessels of council races. These ships looked like they had been built for fighting and nothing else. The human fleet was smaller than what the council had fielded against the Devourers, but it looked infinitely more dangerous. The ships were angular and armored, covered in weapon systems that the aliens did not recognize. Instead of smooth energy signatures, they radiated aggressive intent. Admiral Song Hai arrived on the flagship Seoul, a massive battleship that bristled with kinetic weapons and missile launchers. She was a tall woman with gray hair and scars on her hands from old battles. Her uniform was practical rather than decorative, and her eyes held the cold calculation of a professional killer. General Park Min came with the second wave, bringing troop transports full of human soldiers. He was a compact man with the build of someone who had spent his life in combat. His staff officers looked like they had been carved from stone, and they studied the alien defenders with the eyes of predators evaluating prey. Dr. Kim Soo briefed the human commanders on devourer capabilities, while the alien council members watched, in growing alarm. The humans asked questions that no civilized species would consider. How much explosive can we pack into a frigate before it cannot move? General Park Min asked. What is the minimum crew needed to ram a destroyer into an enemy ship? Admiral Song Hai inquired. Can we manufacture chemical weapons using asteroid mining equipment? Colonel Jang Ho wanted to know. The alien observers were horrified by these questions, but the human officers discussed them like routine technical problems. They spoke of acceptable casualty rates and minimum damage thresholds with the calm professionalism that other species reserved for discussing weather patterns. These methods are monstrous. Queen Mind Kesara buzzed in distress. These methods will work, Admiral Songhai replied without emotion. The Devourers have never faced an enemy that fights like humans. They will not be able to adapt quickly enough. Captain Yoon Jin looked out at the mixed fleet of human and alien ships gathering around Nexus Prime. The Devourer fleet emerged from dark space like a swarm of nightmares. Thousands of bioships dropped out of faster-than-light travel around Nexus Prime, their living hulls pulsing with organic rhythms. War Prime Theknos commanded from his massive flagship, a creature the size of a small moon that looked like a cross between a spider and a whale. Admiral Songhai stood on the Bridge of the Soul, watching the enemy fleet through the main display. Around her, human and alien officers worked together at control stations, preparing for a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Enemy fleet composition, reported Commander Kim Do, studying his sensors. 3,000 bioships of various sizes. They are moving in adaptive formations that shift to counter expected threats. Weapon status? Admiral Songhai asked. All kinetic systems loaded and ready, replied Lieutenant Shin-A. Nuclear mines deployed along the approach routes, ramming ships prepared for suicide runs. The alien council members who remained on Nexus Prime watched the preparations with growing horror. They had expected the humans to use primitive versions of standard tactics. Instead, they were witnessing military preparations that violated every rule of civilized warfare. General Park Min coordinated ground forces from his command ship. Human Marines checked their equipment one final time, loading magazines with simple, ballistic ammunition and sharpening combat knives. Their gear looked crude compared to alien technology, but it had one advantage that sophisticated weapons lacked. The Devourers had never seen anything like it. First wave incoming, announced the sensor operator. Devourer scouts are approaching our outer perimeter. War Prime Theknos had used the same tactics against every council fleet. Send scouts to analyze enemy capabilities, adapt bioship defenses accordingly, then overwhelm the enemy with superior numbers and technology. But the scouts found something they had never encountered before. Colonel Jang Ho led the first human response in a squadron of small fighters that looked like flying coffins. Each ship was loaded with chemical explosives and piloted by a single volunteer who had no intention of returning alive. Target the lead scout ship, Jang Ho ordered over the communication system. Remember, we are not trying to win this engagement. We are trying to confuse them. The human fighters accelerated directly toward the Devourer scouts. The bioships immediately began adapting their defenses, expecting energy weapons or kinetic projectiles. Their living hulls shifted and changed, preparing to absorb or deflect the expected attacks. Instead, Jang Ho's fighter smashed directly into the largest scout ship and exploded. The chemical warhead detonated inside the bioship's hull, releasing clouds of toxic gas that the living vessel could not adapt to quickly enough. The other human pilots followed their colonel's example. One by one, they rammed their explosive ships into the Devourer scouts. The bioship's adaptation systems overloaded, trying to understand attacks that made no technological sense. War Prime Theknos watched the engagement from his flagship with growing confusion. His voice echoed across the Devourer fleet as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The primitives are destroying their own ships, he announced. They sacrifice valuable resources for minimal tactical gain. This behavior does not compute. The remaining human fighters broke off and retreated, leaving behind a cluster of damaged Devourer scouts. The bioships had survived the attacks, but their adaptation systems were confused and overloaded. Admiral Songhai smiled grimly as she watched the first phase of the battle. They expected sophisticated attacks that they could analyze and counter. Instead, they got suicide runs that their systems cannot process. The main Devourer fleet began its advance toward Nexus Prime. The bioships moved in perfect formations, their hulls already adapting to counter the energy weapons and quantum torpedoes they expected to face. Captain Li Su commanded a destroyer, loaded with tungsten rods and chemical explosives. His ship looked primitive compared to the sleek Devourer bioships, but it had capabilities that no organic system could anticipate. "Firing kinetic bombardment," Li Su announced. His ship launched, a barrage of simple tungsten rods at relativistic speeds. The metal projectiles were nothing more than dense chunks of metal, accelerated to incredible velocity. They carried no energy signatures that the bioships could analyze. They used no sophisticated technology that could be understood and countered. Tungsten rods punched through bioship hulls like bullets through paper. The living vessel's adaptation systems had no way to counter simple kinetic impact. Their organic armor was designed to absorb energy and deflect sophisticated projectiles, not to stop basic physics. Several Devourer ships began leaking atmosphere and biological fluids into space. Their hulls tried to adapt and seal the breaches, but the damage was too random and chaotic for their systems to process effectively. War Prime. Technos roared with rage as he watched his supposedly invincible fleet taking damage from primitive attacks. "How are they harming us with such crude methods?" Dr. Kim Soo monitored the battle from her science station aboard the Seoul. "The bioships are designed to adapt to logical attacks," she explained to the alien observers. "But human warfare is not logical. It is emotional, chaotic, and often self-destructive." The second wave of attacks came from human ships that looked like flying scrap heaps. Captain Park Ji commanded a cruiser that had been converted into a massive chemical weapon. Instead of trying to penetrate the bioships' hulls, his ship released clouds of corrosive gas that ate through organic materials. The Devourer bioships tried to adapt to the chemical attack, but their living systems could not process all the different toxins at once. Some ships began to dissolve from the outside in, their hulls eaten away by chemicals that their adaptation systems could not counter fast enough. "This is impossible," War Prime Techno snarled. "Primitive species cannot defeat advanced biotechnology." But the impossible was happening all around him. Human ships that should have been destroyed in seconds were tearing through his fleet, using methods that violated every principle of sophisticated warfare. Sergeant Kim Do led the first boarding action against a damaged Devourer ship. His Marines used shaped charges to blow holes in the bioship's hull, then stormed inside with simple firearms and combat knives. The bioship's internal defenses were designed to counter energy weapons and sophisticated boarding equipment. They had no response for humans who simply blew holes in walls and fought with primitive weapons. "Resistance is minimal," Kim Do reported over the communication system. "The internal defenses cannot adapt to ballistic weapons and edged tools." His Marines moved through the bioship's corridors like a plague, using flamethrowers and explosive charges to destroy everything in their path. The ship's living systems tried to respond, but they could not understand enemies who solved problems by setting everything on fire. The tide of battle continued to turn as more human units engaged the Devourer fleet. Every attack violated the expectations of sophisticated warfare. Every tactic ignored the principles that civilized species followed. Commander Yu Han rammed his heavy cruiser directly into the side of a Devourer battleship. The collision destroyed both vessels, but the explosion created a breach that allowed other human ships to pour weapons fire into the bioship's interior. Lieutenant Colonel Li Min led a squadron of fighters that used old-fashioned cluster bombs to saturate Devourer ships with thousands of small explosions. The bioship's adaptation systems overloaded trying to counter so many simultaneous impacts. Major Songdu commanded ground forces that had been launched in simple metal pods toward damaged bioships. His soldiers used breaching charges and portable cutting tools to fight their way inside enemy vessels, then destroyed critical systems with satchel charges and hand grenades. War Prime Technos watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by tactics that should not have worked. His bioships were superior in every way to the primitive human vessels. His technology was thousands of years more advanced. His adaptive systems should have been able to counter any attack, but sophistication was useless against enemies who refused to follow the rules of sophisticated warfare. All ships implement maximum adaptation protocols, Theknos ordered. Counter these primitive attacks with overwhelming force. The remaining Devourer ships began changing their configurations, trying to adapt to human tactics. But for every adaptation they made, the humans found a new way to violate expectations. When the bioships adapted to counter kinetic weapons, human ships switched to chemical attacks. When they adapted to counter chemicals, human fighters began ramming them with nuclear warheads. When they adapted to counter nuclear attacks, human marines boarded them with flamethrowers and explosives. Admiral Song Hai coordinated the chaotic battle from her flagship, watching as human forces used every dirty trick they had ever learned. The enemy expects logical responses to their adaptations, she announced to her staff. Give them chaos instead. The final blow came when Captain Zhang Ai led a squadron of converted freighters loaded with nuclear mines toward the Devourer flagship. Her ships looked harmless, like simple cargo vessels that had been caught in the battle. War Prime Theknos ignored them, focusing his attention on the more obvious threats. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. The space around Nexus Prime was filled with debris. Broken pieces of Devourer bioships floated among the wreckage of human vessels. The battle had lasted 12 hours, and when it ended, the supposedly invincible enemy was fleeing into dark space. War Prime Theknos commanded what remained of his fleet from a damaged flagship that leaked biological fluids into the void. Half of his ships had been destroyed or too badly damaged to continue fighting. The other half were contaminated with human weapons that his biotechnology could not fully adapt to counter. Retreat to the outer rim, he ordered his surviving captains. We must regroup and analyze these new enemy tactics. But even as his ships limped away from the battlefield, Theknos knew that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in thousands of years, the Devourers had encountered prey that fought back effectively. Admiral Song Hai stood on the Bridge of the Soul, watching the enemy fleet disappear into hyperspace. Around her, human and alien officers worked together to coordinate rescue operations and assess the damage. Casualty report, she requested. Commander Kim Do looked up from his console. We lost 60% of our fleet, Admiral, but we destroyed over 70% of the Devourer force. The numbers were terrible by any civilized standard. Humans had sacrificed thousands of lives and dozens of ships to achieve victory. But, by human military standards, it was an acceptable exchange rate. High Counselor Vexthera arrived on the Soul's bridge with the other surviving council members. His crystal body was dim with exhaustion, but for the first time in weeks, he was not flickering with panic patterns. Your methods worked, he said to Admiral Song Hai. The Devourers have been defeated. This battle is won, the Admiral corrected. But the war is not over. Theknos will regroup and return with new adaptations. Dr. Kim Soo stepped forward with her analysis tablet. The Devourer bioships are designed to learn from defeat and adapt accordingly. They will return with countermeasures for everything we used against them. Queen Mind Kessara buzzed with concern. Then we have only delayed our destruction? No, General Park Min said as he joined the group. We have taught them to fear us. Fear is a weapon that sophisticated species do not understand. The general activated a holographic display showing intelligence gathered from the battle. Recordings of Devourer communications revealed confusion and growing uncertainty in their ranks. They have never faced an enemy that fights like humans, Parkman explained. Their entire tactical doctrine is based on adaptation and technological superiority. But human warfare is not about technology. It is about will. Over the following days, reports came in from across the galaxy. The Devourer retreat had turned into a general withdrawal. Bioships that had been consuming worlds were pulling back to regroup. For the first time since the invasion began, the galaxy had breathing room, but Admiral Song Hai was not satisfied with a defensive victory. She gathered her surviving captains for a planning session that would have horrified any civilized military observer. We are going to hunt them down, she announced. We are going to find their main fleet and destroy it completely. Captain Li Su, whose destroyer had survived the battle despite ramming 2 enemy ships, nodded grimly. What are your orders, Admiral? We are going to do something the Devourers will never expect. Song Hai replied. We are going to attack them while they are trying to adapt to our tactics. The plan that emerged from the Human War Council was simple and brutal. Instead of waiting for the enemy to return, human forces would pursue the retreating devourers and attack them before they could fully adapt to human methods. Colonel Jiang Ho, who had survived his suicide attack by ejecting at the last moment, volunteered to lead the pursuit force. They expect us to consolidate our defenses, he said. They do not expect us to follow them into dark space. Dr. Kim Soo had been studying captured devourer biomaterial and made a disturbing discovery. Their adaptation process requires time and resources, she reported, but more importantly, it requires them to survive long enough to learn. What does that mean? High Counselor Vexathera asked. It means we do not give them time to adapt, General Park Min said. We hit them hard and fast, using different tactics each time. We change our methods faster than they can learn to counter them. The pursuit began immediately. Human ships loaded with new types of weapons and experimental tactics followed the Devourer trail through hyperspace. They found the enemy fleet regrouping around a dead star system, trying to repair their damaged bioships. The second battle was even more chaotic than the first. Captain Park Ji led the opening attack with ships that had been converted into flying bombs. Instead of sophisticated explosives, they used simple chemical reactions that created massive fireballs. The Devourer bioships tried to adapt to the new attack method, but before they could complete the process, Commander Yu Han struck with a different tactic. His ships released clouds of metallic particles that interfered with the bioship's sensory systems. War Prime Technos found himself fighting an enemy that refused to use the same tactic twice. Every time his ships began to adapt to one attack method, the humans switched to something completely different. They are not following any logical pattern, he reported to his surviving captains. Their tactics change randomly with no strategic coherence, but there was a pattern, though it was one that no sophisticated species could understand. The humans were using the most fundamental principle of their military doctrine: do whatever works, and when it stops working, do something else. Major. Songdu led boarding parties that used different weapons and tactics on each ship they attacked. One bioship was cleared with flamethrowers, another was taken with explosive charges, a third was captured using simple ballistic weapons and edged tools. The Devourer defense systems could not adapt to attacks that constantly changed methods. Their biotechnology was designed to learn from repeated exposure to the same tactics. But the humans never repeated anything exactly the same way twice. Sergeant Kim Do found himself fighting hand-to-hand with Devourer bioforms in the corridors of their flagship. The organic creatures were designed to counter sophisticated combat systems, but they had no defense against a human soldier with a combat knife and a willingness to die fighting. Your primitive methods cannot defeat our advanced evolution, one bioform hissed as Kim Do cut it down with his blade. Watch me, the sergeant replied, advancing toward the next enemy. The final assault on the Devourer flagship was led by Captain Shin A in a converted mining ship loaded with industrial explosives. She rammed the massive bioship at full speed, detonating her cargo inside its hull. The explosion tore through the flagship's living systems faster than they could adapt or repair. War Prime Technos found himself trapped in a dying ship with no escape route available. Commander Li Min found the Devourer leader in the ruins of his command chamber, surrounded by failing biosystems and the bodies of his crew. Technos was badly wounded, his biomechanical body sparking and leaking fluids. You have destroyed my fleet, Technos said, his voice weak but still defiant. But others will come. The Devourer collective is vast beyond your comprehension. Then, we will destroy them too, Li Min replied. We will hunt down every last one of your kind and show them what happens when they threaten human space. You are monsters, Technos whispered as his systems failed. You fight without honor, without mercy, without restraint. We fight to protect what we love, Li Min said. Everything else is negotiable. The War Prime died with those words echoing in his failing hearing organs. When the pursuit fleet returned to Nexus Prime, they brought with them the news that the Devourer threat had been eliminated. The surviving bioships had scattered into dark space, leaderless and broken. The Galactic Council held a formal ceremony to honor the human forces that had saved their civilization. High Counselor Vexithara spoke for all the surviving alien races when he addressed the assembled crowd. "We were wrong about humanity," he announced, his crystal body glowing with patterns of respect and gratitude. "We called you primitive barbarians. We dismissed your methods as crude and unsophisticated." He paused, looking directly at Admiral Songhai and the other human commanders. "We forgot that sometimes sophistication is weakness. Sometimes the most effective solution is the simplest one. Sometimes the galaxy needs those who are willing to fight like demons to protect what they love." Ambassador Kang Day stepped forward to address the council. "You offered us membership if we helped you survive. We kept our part of the bargain. And we will keep ours," Vexithara replied. "The Galactic Council formally recognizes humanity as a full member species with all rights and privileges. Furthermore, we offer you a permanent seat on the High Council." The ceremony concluded with the signing of formal treaties that made humanity equal partners in galactic civilization. But more importantly, it marked a change in how the galaxy viewed the human species. No longer were humans seen as primitive barbarians unworthy of civilized company. They were now recognized as the galaxy's protectors, the species that other races called when sophisticated methods failed. Dr. Kim Soo established the Institute for Unconventional Warfare at Nexus Prime, where alien species could study human military tactics. The courses were popular but had high dropout rates,